Hi, I'm Ryan Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He is a seasoned pastor, advocate for unity and transformation within the church, and of course, an author too, and the author of the book Guided by Grace, no other than Mr. Byron K. Haney.
How you doing, Daniel? Good to talk to you.
Fabulous, fabulous, Mr. Byron. And welcome to Book 101. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I miss?
Yeah, so I've been a pastor for about 32 years as of July 25th, serving in Iowa right now. I work with about 169 congregations, helping them to do mission stewardship and human care. And I've authored three books, and this is my third in a series. Well, actually, not a series, but the first one was on healing race in America, which kind of got me on the path to being kind of an advocate for how you heal race. My second book was kind of a devotional book I did with a bunch of other authors, helping kids who are transitioning from junior high to high school have some devotional things to go through in their life. And this one is kind of based on my dissertation, helping the church navigate through the change process. I'm married, I have six kids, ages 31 to 13, four boys and two girls. Two are married, and I have two grandkids.
Mr. Byron, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And let's talk about guided by grace. How do you define grace in the context of leadership and organizational transformation?
Well, I wanted this book to be something that was realistic, and so it starts out talking about a pastor who's a young pastor just graduated from seminary, heading to his first congregation, and he has to lead a church that's kind of declining through a change process. And he had to learn along the way, how do you lead a church with compassion and understanding? And that's where the grace part comes in. You have to do leading a church through something like this with a heart and a love for the people and relationships to do it well.
And what inspired you to write Guided by Grace, and why frame organizational change through the narrative lens?
Well, we have so many books on leading change. I thought, was how am I going to approach this differently? So this is based on my 3 years of my doctoral work on organizational change. And I wanted to figure out a way to communicate what I learned through my dissertation research in a way that's readable and applicable for churches. And so doing a narrative was I hope people could see themselves in the change process, whether they are the pastor leading change or they're a member of a congregation that's going through change. I thought the narrative way was a good way for people to kind of get into a story and then give them at the end of each chapter some how to tips, questions to kind of dig deeper based on the things they just read.
And what is your ideal reader? Seasoned leader, emerging change makers, or a broader audience?
It's really geared toward church leaders, whether you are a pastor leading change or you're a leader of a church on the board or a council and you're going through the change process. It's geared toward them, but I made it so that anyone could pick it up and enjoy just the narrative part of it. If you want to go deeper, there's an opportunity for people to go deeper, or you could just enjoy the story of how this young pastor navigates this change process with scripture as a background for how he does it.
Let's talk about the core themes and philosophy. Does the title suggests a spiritual or values driven approach to change? How does grace differ from a traditional leadership strategies?
Well, what I was trying to capture in this process, especially when you're dealing with a church, is unlike a business who you have more influence over your employees because they're getting paid to with the organizational change. With a church, you're trying to steer a group of volunteers who don't have to necessarily do anything differently. So you have to learn to maintain the relationships during the change process. And it's really, really critical that you get people on board by winning their heart first, because you don't have a stick, so to speak, like the business world does. You have to use a carrot to guide people through the change process. So the whole idea was, how do you do that with winning people's hearts and their minds in the change process?
Mr. Byron, why do you believe storytelling is such a powerful tool for driving organizational change?
Because every good organizational book will tell you that you have to be able to share with your leadership, with your team, with your organization wins. In the church, we are known for telling stories. Jesus was a master storyteller. He always used stories and parables to communicate spiritual truth. So we love stories, and it was a good way for me to say, let me tell you a powerful story of how God guided this congregation through change with the help of a pastor and a team of people who also saw what God was doing through them. So
How do you balance empathy and accountability when leading teams through transitions?
yeah, empathy is critical, and part of what I wanted to bring out in this book, and there's a chapter in the book where everything is blowing up on this young pastor because he was trying to lead change too quickly. And some of the key people who we need to get on board were not on board, and they resisted the change, even got to the point where they were going to sign a petition to get him fired. And he had to go back and circle back and figure out, why am I losing these people? And so there's a chapter where he goes in and sits down with all the antagonists in his church and wants to hear from them and hear their story. And that heart, that compassion of going, let me sit down and sit in their shoes for a while, gave him a deeper understanding of the fact that they weren't necessarily opposed to change. They were opposed to what change brings, which is loss. Anytime you change something in your life, you're losing something. It's a sense of loss. So how do you empathize with people when you bring change to an organization, that any change you bring is going to create loss for people? So I really want to bring out the fact that empathy is critical to understanding everybody's dealing with loss during a change process.
Can you share a key example from the book where grace made the difference in a difficult change process?
Sure. So there's a woman in the book, Eleanor, and her dad was at one time the president of the congregation when the former pastor, a younger pastor, came in, made all kinds of changes, and that led to her father, who had some health problems, dying of a heart attack. And she blamed the heart attack on the change process and didn't want to see her church go through that same kind of trauma again. When Pastor Terrence goes and sits down with her and hears her story, he begins to understand that it's not that she's opposed to him, she's opposed to the trauma that the last change brought to the church. He says, I'm not sure our church can handle one more series of trauma like this. And he began to understand that, and it actually sympathized with the fact that she just needed to have someone honor the fact that he understood how painful this could be, and he was going to be very delicate in the way he handled that process with them.
Mr. Byron, let's talk about the practical leadership insights. What are the biggest misconceptions leaders have about managing organizational change?
I think the biggest misconception is that if it's a good change, and everybody should be on board with it, and not take into account that everybody has a different reason for why they do what they do. So when you're the new person in an organization, you can see things that maybe people who are part of the group does not see, the leaders don't currently see. It's important for you as a new leader to be able to show them what insights you have, by still honoring the fact that they have a history, a past, and they've been doing this for a long time. So you're trying to balance, how do you bring innovation to an organization while still honoring the traditions of that congregation or that organization?
How can leaders cultivate a culture where grace and growth coexist, especially during upheaval?
Yeah, that was the common theme of this book, and the key to that is relationships. You have to maintain those relationships all throughout the change process. That means checking with people, having long conversations. It means taking people out to lunch. It means sitting and listening a lot to what people are saying and communicating. The more you listen, the more you understand where they're coming from, the more you can communicate the reason for the change and how it benefits them, but also benefits the organization as a whole. So it really comes down to, can you take the time to listen, which means your change may be slower, the process will be, but it will be more lasting as long as you honor the people who are there and the changes that they're going through to be part of this organization.
Your book emphasizing narrative. How can leaders craft a compelling vision that inspires action without feeling manipulative?
Right. Yeah, that's a touchy one because I think as you read the book, Terrence started out thinking the change to be so powerful, people will want to be part of this. When he got pushback, he had to step back and go, why aren't they on board with this? And realizing that it wasn't so much that people didn't want and didn't see the need for change, but they worried about the loss that the change would bring. Some people worried about, can we financially deal with the change? Can we afford to do this change? Some people were connected. One member of the congregation was connected because he and his wife came to that church as a couple, and she had recently passed, and he saw the way the church was, the impact it was having in community as her legacy, and did not want to lose what it meant to them as a couple. And so that was his reason for not wanting to change. So you really have to sit down and talk to people and realize, what is it about this church, its traditions, its history, that's so important to you? How can we honor that? How can we not lose that? But how can we still do things that will connect with a new generation of people who don't have the same history and values that you do? So there's one scene in the book toward the end when the new people are coming in, that I have some of the older members, Eleanor actually, kind of walking the new members through some of the history of the congregation and the things that it's done in the past. And so she kind of served as a um, curator of the museum, so to speak, and telling people about all the different things that this church has done and meant and the people it's impacted. And so she gave them a richer history and appreciation for the traditions and where the church had been and where it's going now forward. So she kind of added perspective to new people coming in.
Very well said, Mr. Byron. Very well said indeed. What's your advice for leaders facing resistance to change while trying to maintain morale?
I'm just going to say it again. I think the most important thing leaders can do is listen. You have to be a listening leader, an active listening leader, because your people will tell you what they're resisting. Sometimes it's very valid. Sometimes it's just emotional, but you still need to give them a voice and show them, like you talked about before, empathy, to say, I understand how this is important to you. I will do everything possible by including you in the decision making process so that you feel as though you're being heard. One thing that the pastor did in his book, I really wanted to point out, was when he talked to the people who were resistant, he put them on the leadership team that was part of the change process. So now they're not just bystanders, but they're active participants in the change. So they help to lead the change with the new people together. So that new coalition of old and new, those who were resistant and those who weren't, now formed a team of advocates who said, we're on board with this change. So when those who are resistant are now part of the planning of it, there's a lot less pushback on the part of those who were resistant before.
Let's talk about the personal and professional relation reflections. Was there a personal experience that shaped your approach to grace-centered leadership, Mr. Byron?
Yeah, well, all of my congregations, I served for 15 years in the parish. All of my congregations were churches that were in decline and needed to be turned around. So they were all turnaround churches. So I learned from the very first mistakes I made to the very last one where it actually worked pretty well that the difference I learned between my first year of ministry and my 13th year in ministry was the importance of bringing people along with you in the change process. If you try and go into a place and say, here is this big, bold vision that I have, that you have, and that's the key there, and not that we have, you run into a lot more resistance. When you approach it as, here is our vision that God has given us as a people, you have a lot more voices and a lot more different ways to communicate where God is leading you than just having the one solo voice. Someone once told me it's easier to shoot at one person than it is to shoot at a whole bunch of people, figuratively, so to speak. So um, it's really about having more voices, more people saying it different ways that will hit people in different places than just having one voice of leading the change always.
How has the writing of this book refined your own leadership style or belief?
Well, when I started out my dissertation work, I assumed that servant leadership was the most successful form of leadership in a church. But my research told me that actually transformational leadership was actually a stronger advocate for organizational change because servant leaders tend to be those who, when they get hit with resistance and people are upset with them, they tend to not want to get people upset and push forward. Whereas transformational leaders tend to lift up all those people around them and also keep in mind the vision of moving forward. So I've learned that I'm best when I take on a transformational leadership approach to my leadership style versus the servant leadership approach to things.
Mr. Byron, as a seasoned pastor, advocate, and an author, what are your short term and long term goals?
Well, I think I'm working on my second series, a book in this series, and that is going to be about a church that goes through a financial hardship and a moral decline of a pastor. My goal is there's so many churches that don't like to make the tough calls when a crisis hits. And what happens when you don't do that is the entire body suffers. So I want to it's going to be kind of like another guided by grace, but this is leading when moral failure happens to an organization. And I've seen it happen a lot in churches. How do you overcome that kind of a hurdle in a congregation? Because it can also destroy not only the organization, but it can also damage the faith of people.
Good luck to your goals and looking forward for more success, Mr. Byron. And what would your piece of advice for those people out there want to be like you?
I would say keep keep your eye focused on what God has in mind for you. Because if you're doing something that He's designed for you to do, He will give you the strength and ability and the doors to do this. I was turned down by 5 different publishing houses to get this book out. And I was ready to go, okay, I got to publish this on my own. When out of the blue, this publishing house, WIPF, wrote back and said, we love your book. We want to publish it. I'm like, whoa, someone said yes after all the no's. So don't let no be a deterrent for you. Keep looking for it. If you believe in it, then keep pressing forward.
Wow. Thank you for that advice, Mr. Byron. And can you please recommend a book or books that influence your journey?
I love the book by Jim Collins. If you haven't read it, Good to Great. It was one of the books I used in my dissertation, and he talks about how do you take a what's the difference between good organizations and great organizations. He talks about, for example, one of the ones he uses in the book is Kodak, and how they as a camera company. Oh no, it wasn't Kodak. It was actually Circuit City and Best Buy. If you remember, Circuit City and Best Buy were competitors.
Mhm.
Realized that their model wasn't working, where Best Buy adapted, and so now there are no more Circuit Cities, but there are a lot of Best Buy. So he's like, notice how those two organizations who had great leadership, what made them what one successful and one not. So I loved how he made those kind of comparisons.
Hmm. Interesting indeed, Mr. Byron. And thank you for that recommended book. And what's the first step that you will advise for leaders who want to implement this approach in their organizations?
Well, I would recommend they read the book because I do think it gives them kind of a kind of a good step by step process to kind of go through. Because you, the biggest part about change in an organization, especially a church, is unless you give people the sense of urgency to change, there is no reason for people to want to go through the painful process of change. It's true in our own lives. When we go to the doctor, he says, "Oh, you gotta have a better diet." You go, "Yeah, whatever." You have a heart attack. All of a sudden, oh, that's really important. I should probably pay attention now because there's a sense of urgency. Organizations do not like change, and they will do everything to resist change unless something motivates them, either scares them into it, or they realize that if we do not change, we will not exist. So you have to create that sense of momentum to want to change. And then you got to find a team to come alongside you, because when one person tries to do change by himself, you will realize that it's almost impossible, because you will get distracted, you will get discouraged. If you have a team alongside you, and I think it's important that the team is diverse with many different skills, gifts, and abilities, that makes the work easier, but it also makes it more enjoyable because you're not making this journey by yourself. Then I realized you get to the point where the vision is really critical. Then you start to plan as a team, what is that next step? And so I would advise leaders to, first of all, get somebody in your organization to see along with you that there is an urgency that the organization needs to change, and then find other advocates besides the one that you identified to come alongside you in the journey.
Mr. Byron, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, people, my other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too, comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well, geography 101 in fourth season, and my baby podcast Law 101 and Mental Health 101, Love Letters in third season, and Movie 101 Review and Music 101 in fourth season, and Science 101 and Sex 101 in its first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Mr. Byron, what's your hope for the long-term impact of your book on leaders and their teams?
Well, what I'm hearing so far from people is that they're using the book with their teams to help their church navigate a change process. So I'm hoping that it becomes kind of a gold standard, so to speak, of how do you lead change in a church. Because I think it's one of the most important organizations out there. And if the church can adapt not its message, but kind of adapt its processes so they can effectively meet the needs of the current generation, I think it has a powerful ability to transform lives. So I really hope I help the church still be a church that is an organization that is gospel focused and leading people back to what's really needed, the importance of spreading the gospel.
Well, Mr. Byron Haney, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So can you please invite our listeners to support your book, Guided by Grace?
Well, I'd encourage them to do that. And also, they could check out my podcast, Becoming Bridge Builders, as well.
Yes, 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 yes. So where do people can buy your book, Mr. Byron?
They can find it on Amazon, on Barnes and Noble, anywhere books are sold.
Awesome. And for the podcast itself?
It's on all the podcast locations: Amazon, Spotify, um, Apple. So, yep, all those places.
What's the title of your podcast, Mr. Byron?
Becoming Bridge Builders.
Becoming Rich Builder. Yes, people, let's support Mr. Byron Haney, because if you support him, for sure, more and more and more empowering guided grace to come, more and more empowering episodes of the podcast itself. So, Mr. Byron, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Daniel.
More to come, people. See you soon.